Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 2 preview, and we'll be looking into several key topics for this week, like triple captain Haaland, what to do with players like Nkunku, Quansah, and Barco, and also any sort of top transfer targets for this week. I'd also like to just generally point out that we're at Game Week 2 this season. Unless you have some major pressing issues in your team, you're probably planned to roll, and I understand that the content might not make sense for you, but triple captain Haaland might generally be on your mind. So that's that. As far as this preview video and just generally channel content, it's been powered by Fantasy Football Hub, an amazing tool to help improve your experience as an FPL manager and also increase your rank. It definitely helped me get my top 500 finish last season, so have a look at the link in bio as well. It's a good week to maybe also assess whether you want to actually look at some transfers, but more than likely, as I said, it probably is going to be a roll because we're at that point in the season where 2 free transfers sometimes is a lot more powerful than 1 free transfer. So quickly jumping into triple captain Haaland, I think we should consult the authority on FPL fixture planning, which is Ben Crellin, right? You can find Ben Crellin and follow him on Twitter, the best go-to place to kind of understand the fixture landscape. The key point, of course, is that the FA Cup sort of scheduling impacts have effectively restricted the amount of blanks and doubles that we have this season. It's very likely that we have 2 double game weeks. And then the question, of course, is what are the pros and cons of the triple captain for Haaland in Game Week 2? I think the pros are definitely that Haaland is 100% fit. The second pro is that they're not playing Champions League football yet, so his minutes don't really need to be managed. And the third pro is that this is potentially, at least from this point in time, the best single game week fixture of the season for Haaland. Right now, when I look at some of the sort of models that we have in place, some of the sort of team projections for defense, it is clear that a lot of teams might rate Southampton or Ipswich as the worst defense in the league. And this is a very good fixture window to just simply target a fully fit Haaland. And if you think that, let's say, another pro would be that the mystery chip can actually be used in a double game week. If you think that you're planning to bench boost on a double, and you're going to also use the mystery chip on a double, in theory, we don't really have capacity to use a single game week captaincy at this moment in time better than this week. So that's the pros. What are the cons? The cons, I think, is that you can always just wait and see and assess how we feel about certain teams. Another point, too, is that Salah and Saka are fantastic players. When I look at betting projections for total points over the course of an FPL season, I can see that Salah, Saka, and Haaland are very close within each other, and there's not much separation between the 3 of them. So you can actually argue that there are maybe 9 fixtures this season, if we're looking at purely all the promoted teams and sort of evaluating them as similarly poor defenses, to look at single game week captaincy options. On top of that, I'd also say the beauty of waiting a little bit, if you're very specifically wanting to triple captain on Haaland, is that on game week 30, you have the opportunity to captain Haaland versus Leicester at home. And by that point in time, you'll get a good understanding of the double game week landscape in FPL. So I think one of the beauties is if you hold off on this triple captaincy, you can simply just wait for the next best game, which is Leicester at home, potentially, where you also have a lot of the information of any of the fixture scheduling impacts that we'll have in FPL. And that's sort of my thoughts. Another con, I would say, is ultimately we can still have unexpected double game weeks come up. We've had it in the last 2-3 seasons in a row, and I wouldn't be surprised if something comes up once again. So that's sort of my thoughts on triple game captain Haaland. But I think the main point is that you have plenty of windows to consider a very similar sort of level or quality single game week captaincy, so you don't necessarily need to feel pressured to use it this week, and that's my thoughts. As far as what to do with Nkunku, which is a very interesting topic, I have to say once again that, some of Enzo's comments this week have actually been a little bit positive, I suppose, in the lens of, let's say, an Nkunku owner, right? We've already seen a couple players exiled from the team. It's very clear he's also mentioned that he plans to work with and is already working with a thin squad of 21 players. So it's very clear that Nkunku is part of that 21. And I do think that his minutes can improve. Now, the João Felix transfer is done. I don't think the Osimhen transfer is going to happen, although maybe it still can. But it's very likely that we have Nkunku maybe playing left wing minutes, maybe sort of minutes at the 8 or the 10. And for now, I think the concern, I suppose, with João Felix coming in is you're restricting the minutes from the center forward position, which is why I haven't mentioned it. Another thing, too, of course, is people will just look immediately at that game week 1 sort of minutes output versus City, 58, and it's very poor. And the formation as well, the way it was set up with 3 center midfields, doesn't really bode well for getting attackers and attacking minutes for players that aren't Cole Palmer effectively. I still think that, and I have the confidence that in Game Week 2, we might see a different tactical setup, and that Enzo might be a little bit flexible around that, because you can always argue that teams will try to set up a little bit differently versus a team like Man City or even Arsenal. I think that's totally justified. What I would like to see as an Nkunku owner is simply him playing in a more advanced position, not necessarily left wing for him, a more central one at least, and to see what happens in game weeks 2 and 3. Because I don't really think that you need to see Nkunku as an immediate sell. I never thought that Nkunku was going to be a 90-minute player, and him being a 90-minute player would, as I said, make him a game breaker. The reality is, of course, if he's playing less than 60 minutes a game, then he's not really worth being in our teams. But if he's playing something like 70 plus minutes a game, then I still think he's very easily a hold for our teams. And it's only until we see some of these easier fixtures and see how Chelsea set up there that I'd be prepared to actually move off of Nkunku. What's nice to what I've mentioned previously with Nkunku is that a lot of the players that we might be targeting for the future, like in game week 4 or even game week 3, are actually downgrades in price compared to Nkunku. When you look at a player like Yankuba Minte, maybe even Jorginho Rutter, these are players in game week 4 that have amazing fixtures, and you can actually just simply wait until then to actually downgrade from Nkunku, which is sort of my general picture and sort of understanding of how I'd like to move into Nkunku, move out of Nkunku. As far as the third question, which is going to be Quansah and Barco, I think there's two simple answers to this, right? With Quansah owners, you probably have already taken a price drop. If you haven't already moved to Robinson or Rico, which were the two players that I recommended in my transfer plans video, then simply the way to approach this is you have still more information to be gained. You have Slot's press conference information. Maybe that actually means a Quansah start. On top of that, you also have the opportunity to simply assess what's going on with the 4.0s, because we actually, very interestingly, had another player who could be a potential 4.0 option in Sepp van den Berg, and he's joined Brentford. So in a few weeks' time, you might actually have another nailed 4.0 player. If you had enough depth in place already for Quansah, that's probably why you've actually considered a role, because in my situation, I think I was leaning a little bit more towards a role or simply moving off of Quansah, which I have done to Rico Lewis. But I did that because I had a lot of depth in my team. If I didn't have depth in my team, I probably would have just made the transfer to Robinson. So if you own both Quansah and Barco, you probably would have made a move already. But if you haven't made a move already, I think that that's a tricky position, because technically your only access to players right now are 4.0 players. And I still think it makes a lot of sense to just simply roll Quansah this week and see what happens in terms of his minutes and how it develops. You might even get some information from Slot, as I mentioned. If you're a Porro, Quansah, and Barco owner, I do think that this is an opportunity to actually use Porro as a cash cow if he's suddenly injured. So if we find out suddenly that Porro's not fit and ready to play for game week 2, if the injury seems extensive, then it actually makes sense to go out of Porro in the short term, because I would say that game weeks 4 and 5 for Porro, or rather 3 and 4 for Porro, aren't amazing. So you can use that as an opportunity to just simply move out of Porro early, and then actually find, let's say, someone like Munoz on your team, which gives you the 0.5 to actually upgrade a player like Quansah in the future. That would be my preferred approach. But if you only have, let's say, Quansah as an issue and you've rolled already, I think that's totally fine. As I said, 2 free transfers are very powerful. They're always, more often times than not, more powerful than a single free transfer, unless you're moving a premium to a premium, which can happen this season, right? You've got transfers like Saka to Foden, Son to Foden, etc., this season that can definitely be on the cards. But outside of those very simple premium to premium transfers, for the most part, unless you, let's say, find a situation where you can get, let's say, I don't know, a City attacker at a very cheap price, or a City defender at a very cheap price, or an Arsenal defender at a very cheap price, and they're suddenly, valuable to your team and within your transfer plans, then very often 2 free transfers are better than 1. And you should be totally comfortable rolling the free transfer, getting more information, and making better moves the week after that. As far as the last question, which is top transfer targets this week, I have to say, Darwin actually getting 0 minutes was something that I probably didn't have on my bingo card, but it's very likely that he will get minutes very, very shortly. I don't doubt that at all. But Jota definitely still is a wonderful midfield transfer to look at. I think another great midfield transfer to look at as well is Ben Brereton Diaz, particularly if you're looking and shopping for a budget player. Let's say you own someone like Mavididi and you're actually dealing with a stress that is Mavididi might not actually be a starter for this Steve Cooper team for the time being. I think it actually makes a lot of sense to look at Ben Brereton Diaz as an option, because when you look at, let's say, Southampton's games for the next 3-4 game weeks, they're actually really good, and you're starting off here on a high, in my opinion, with this fixture versus Nottingham Forest. So that's actually definitely a transfer that I would consider. Players like Minte are more a game week 4 transfer for me right now, if you've already passed up on Minte initially. And so that's sort of where I'm sitting at with the 5.5s. Smith Rowe is also very, very interesting, but I do think that Game week 1 was a good perspective of sort of seeing that preseason minutes don't necessarily translate perfectly to match fitness in the Premier League, because I think if anything can be said about the performance of Smith Rowe versus Man United is that clearly he still needs to get that fitness back in his body, and it's going to be a lot tougher than we potentially expected in game week 1. But he still has an amazing run of games starting from game week 2, and I don't see him not starting. So I think he's also still, once again, a very good pick to actually own for a lot of managers. As far as for defenders, we've already talked about this, but definitely I think Robinson has been a very good transfer option for a lot of managers. We also had Fulham actually sign some players this week too, which actually hopefully strengthens the overall defense of the squad. I think Munoz is also a fantastic option too, or even someone like Cucurella from Chelsea. Because whilst Colwell is still there and he's actually an interesting option, I tend to feel that Cucurella's minutes might be a bit more secure than most. And I think also I'd probably also back Chelsea's defense over this run of games, considering that you've already moved off of the Man City fixture over the next 5-6 game weeks in a row. So I think Chelsea players are definitely on my mind for defense. And if you can actually get a nailed player, which I think Cucurella could actually be in that sort of bracket, he becomes very interesting for me. In terms of the forwards, I probably wouldn't touch most of the forwards. I feel like there hasn't been any sort of red flags in the forward territory for this week. So no real sort of main suggestions for any sort of manager. And those are my thoughts. We also had Trippier also technically leave Newcastle, but I do think that once you've missed, let's say, Southampton at home, you've kind of also missed the boat on the ability to jump into someone like Livramento, I think, up until maybe you're considering an early wild card, or of course later down the line if you're really stuck with, let's say, defensive transfers and you just want to bring in someone stable, someone solid, then Livramento obviously is a great pick later down the line. And he probably is right now the best 4.5, but do you need to stretch a transfer necessarily towards him? I don't think that's necessarily the case. So that's it pretty much for the Game Week 2 preview. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.